Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy said the situation in Russia was a sign of chaos and shows no one is in control. His army, meanwhile, says it has launched a new offensive in several areas of the country's east and had made gains in the eastern Donetsk region and around Bakhmut. At the same time, the offensive in the south was still going on. Let's go to the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, where I'm joined by DW special correspondent Aya Ibrahim. Aya, great to see you. So the chaos in Russia with this sudden change from the Wagner group, I'm assuming is being closely monitored in Ukraine. Now, they were advancing towards Moscow and now they're apparently turning back. So how have the Ukrainian government reacted to these events?
Well, Pablo, the day, when these events in Russia started unfolding, the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense tweeted, "We are watching." So certainly lots of people here in government, but also among ordinary Ukrainians, observing very, very closely what's been happening in, just across the border in Russia. And what a day it has been, really just such an extraordinary rapidly unfolding sequence of events. I mean, we haven't really heard a direct official reaction from Ukraine on the latest U-turn by Evgeny Prigozhin and the Wagner forces, but all day President Zelenskyy has been tweeting his take on what's going on, and his take is basically that this all is proof that Russia is suffering from severe internal conflict, and that internal conflict is a result of the miscalculation of invading his country. He said that for a long time Russia has used propaganda to mask its weakness and the chaos, but now regardless of the U-turn or not, that weakness or that chaos is clear for the world to see. We've also heard from other government officials on these events. The foreign minister had used this as an opportunity to say, hey, look, whoever thought that Russia was unbeatable, look at what's going on internally, and he used this as an opportunity to urge countries that have chosen to remain quote unquote neutral in this conflict to come to the side of Ukraine and to support it in its defense.
Aya, what does all this mean for Ukraine's counteroffensive and potentially the course of the war?
Right. So that that town in southern Russia, Rostov-on-Don, that is in the south of the country and is a key part of Russian forces that have been countering Ukraine's counteroffensive, if you will. There are forces stationed there that are directly involved in the fight during this counteroffensive, and it is adjacent to the Donetsk region. So as you can imagine, any kind of chaos or confusion there may have opened today an opportunity for Ukrainian forces to make swift gains in this counteroffensive, which had been going slower than perhaps expected or hoped. But throughout this conflict, the Ukrainians are always very, very careful about releasing information on their gains, for security reasons and perhaps not to undermine this. So I think we're going to have to observe the next 2 to 3 days to see what's going on the ground to really be able to evaluate if there was indeed a window of opportunity and whether Ukraine has, in fact, taken advantage of it.
Now, what about people on the street there in Ukraine going about their daily lives? What's the feeling among them to these dramatic events across the border in Russia?
It's a very sort of conflicting atmosphere. So, I mean, if you walk down the streets here, I mean, I was out all day here in Kyiv. People are going about their daily lives as normally as they can. And we should also remember that they are, while all of this is happening in Russia, they're dealing with the aftermath of Russian attacks every day. So today I visited a high-rise building not very far away from where we are right now, about a 5 to 7 minute drive, that had been hit overnight, and that resulted in the death of 3 civilians. And so when we were there were countless of volunteers, young people that had come from around the neighborhood to clean up, of course, mourn the loss of their fellow Ukrainians, but also to have, bringing food and offering their help. And so, in the background, there's that kind of daily life that's happening. And Ukrainians are, largely paying, investing their energy in that. That's their daily life. But of course, people have been observing the events in Russia very, very closely, and they've developed a sort of kind of dark sense of humor to deal with this, and that's something that I think Ukrainians have developed throughout this war as a kind of means of survival. So we've also seen sort of memes on Ukrainian Twitter showing empty supermarket shelves and saying the popcorn has all been sold out, as a sort of joke at how they're, how closely they're watching the events going on in Russia. So it's a very mixed kind of atmosphere, closely watched, but also Ukrainians in some ways have bigger things to worry about on a day-to-day basis.
Thanks, Aya. DW Special Correspondent Aya Ibrahim in the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. Russia's neighbours have taken to Twitter in response to the situation, mostly to say that they're closely monitoring developments. Latvia's Prime Minister said that border security had been ramped up and that no more Russians would be allowed into the country. Lithuania's president said the Kremlin was reaping what it had sown and that we must prepare for any scenario. European Council President Charles Michel tweeted that while this was an internal Russian issue, EU support for Ukraine was unwavering. Well, let's get the perspective from across the Atlantic, and we're joined now by DW Washington correspondent Stefan Simons. Stefan, good to see you. So tell us, what has been the reaction from the White House?
Well, I can tell you that the White House and the Biden administration has been monitoring, that's the official lingo, the quite confusing and fast-changing situation in Russia, Moscow, around Moscow or Rostov-on-Don. What that means is that the president has been briefed with anything assets here could come up with to analyzing the situation over there. The president is now not in the White House anymore. He's at Camp David, his retreat, Camp David. And interestingly enough, and as to be expected, his national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, is with him, making sure that the president is fully aware of what is going on. Now, what does that mean when the White House or the Biden administration says they are monitoring the situation? It means that if you want to compare the intelligence community here in the U.S., but also across NATO partners and the U.S. as a Christmas tree, this Christmas tree is lit up, meaning they're all talking, trying to get an assessment and really knowing what is going on as we speak, as they are trying to assess what would be a consequence of all of this.
Stefan, what about the US military and national security experts? What have they said about this situation?
So first of all, I think we have to say that everybody, even those experts, were completely surprised and taken off guard by what transpired since Friday night and all into Saturday today. But having said that, most of them, it depends on who you talk to. Military experts are foremost, of course, interested in what does that mean. They try to answer that question. What does that mean for the war in Ukraine? Will the mutiny of the Wagner group against Putin, will this soften the ability of the regular Russian troops to withstand and fight against the counteroffensive the Ukrainians are staging right now? Will this potentially even result in a withdrawal or a totally different picture in the war in Ukraine? The other national security experts, if you will, they are thinking about a step further. Who will be, forgive me, the dead man walking here? Will it be Yevgeny Prigozhin? Or, because just moving to Belarus now, accepting the deal we have reported about, is maybe not a solution long-term and maybe not also a safeguard for his personal life? Or will it be Vladimir Putin as being politically wounded and hurt and shown as weak enough so that other people, from the right in Russia, will take a chance and try to get possibly rid of Vladimir Putin. So this is what they are thinking about. This is what they're talking about in their circles and sharing with us here and there a little bit.
So is Washington on some level preparing for Putin's end in power?
Well, I think not only Washington, but for example, Germany, France, and the entire NATO is having some sort of planning in place of what could be like a what if Vladimir Putin loses power in Moscow. Who is filling the vacuum is everywhere. Never forget, Moscow, Russia is a nuclear power, and that is a major concern for pretty much everybody, but of course for the United States and NATO partners in Europe. The president had talked today to the prime ministers of France and the United Kingdom and to Chancellor Scholz in Germany, and they are both, all of three of them said that they will be monitoring closely, and we just talked about what that basically means, sharing information they gather of what is happening there, as well as they projected strongly that this will not change anything in their support, steadfast support of Ukraine against the aggression of Russia. So let's see what that means, but plans, I think they're there anyway. Is anybody hoping for some mutiny success? Probably not.
Thanks, Stefan. DW Washington correspondent Stefan Simons. Well, DW Brussels correspondent Jack Parrock is monitoring the reactions of European countries to the events that have unfolded in Russia. Here's his assessment.
Here in Brussels, officials from the EU's crisis response team have headed to their office to monitor this situation. And that's basically what we've seen from all the European Union officials and from the countries as well. The French, the German, the Brits, EU officials here, including the EU Council President Charles Michel, say that they're monitoring closely. We have had meetings of the G7 foreign ministers, including the EU's foreign policy chief, and we've seen the United States President Joe Biden having a phone call with Emmanuel Macron, the French President, Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, the British Prime Minister. They are watching closely. They're not saying much more than that now. They want to see what is unfolding on the ground. Firstly, they want to see what it will mean for the war in Ukraine. Obviously, all of the EU's countries, or most of them, have heavily supported the Ukrainians in fighting off or trying to fight off the Russian invasion. But they're also concerned about their own countries. And to that end, what we've seen is the Baltic countries, especially Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania and Poland, countries that share borders with Russia, warning that they should not that people should not be crossing the border into Russia if they do that for their work, for their personal life. We've also seen warnings from the Brits and the Germans and others saying that anybody who is in Russia, any of their nationals, should try and get out where possible. This is a quickly unfolding situation. And I think a lot of these countries, a lot of the European countries especially, are trying to get as much intelligence as they can on exactly what's happening as quickly as possible.
DW correspondent Jack Parrock reporting from Brussels there.